Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Catalyst webinar series presented by the Education Committee for the Southern California PGA. The Catalyst webinar series is a bi-weekly educational platform for creating success and change in your club and career. We are very excited and proud to welcome Mr. Tom Carpus, tournament official for the PGA Tour Champions. Mr. Carpus comes to us with a ton of rules officiating experience. He was appointed to the PGA of America Rules Committee in 1995. He served as vice chairman from 2011 to 2016, served as chairman of the PGA of America Rules Committee for 2017 and 2018. He has officiated at 23 PGA championships, 5 Ryder Cups, 5 senior PGA championships, 9 Masters, 4 Open championships, 3 Players championships, and several other PGA of America championships. He's instructed and or coordinated over 30 PGA and USGA rules workshops, and hails from Pennsylvania and by way of Florida. Mr. Carpus, Tom, thank you for being on the Southern California Catalyst this morning. How are you?
I'm doing great, John. Thank you for inviting me to do this. This is God, I love technology. This is a great way to spread the word on the new rules to PGA members out there in California. It's a thrill for me. So what I thought I would do is, the changes. Of course, this has been a 7-year process that has been undertaken by the RNA and the USGA and culminating here January 1. And of course, in places like California, where you play 12 months out of the year, you hit the ground running as soon as January 1st came around. So you're on the forefront, whereas if you're up in Wisconsin or Minnesota, they got a few months before they have to deal with it. It's encouraging in that PGA America was involved with it right from the get-go. You might remember the comment period where everybody across the world could send in their comments. Our PGA of America Rules Committee, along with Terry Haig, we were able to look through the summary of the changes and give our input, which we did. We sent a letter to the Rules Golf Committee. They looked at it, and as they did with many allied associations all over the country. So I think, and again, not that everyone's going to like every part of the changes, because there are certainly things that many of us don't like, but most of it I think we do like. I think the changes are more progressive as we go into golf here in 2019. So it was probably the most collaborative effort, at least in my time involved in the rules, where everybody was included, and that was a good thing. This is the most significant change since 1984 when the book was reorganized. There weren't a lot of major changes back then, but the book reorganization really made everybody, it was a challenge to find things. And I think that's, right now, if I had to, and all the people that I know within the rules world, common denominators are that it's certainly a little bit harder to read. If you're used to reading rule books before, legal jargon, now we're going into simpler wording, modernized wording. And that's, for a lot, obviously it's easier to read for today's golfer, but a big part of this was also to translate it to other languages. So some of the words that we used in the book before didn't translate well. So part of the challenge was to do that with the changes for 19. We've gone from 34 rules to 24 rules, but the book is bigger, which is interesting. But the main reason for that is that within the rule book now, and of course, you got the Players Edition, the rule book, and then the official guide. But the rule book now, a lot of, I think over 400 decisions have been written right into the rule, which is really good because essentially before you used to read a rule, then you had to go dig out an interpretation in the decisions book, and that's where it was hidden. Now many of these answers are found right in the rule itself, which I think is really good in that respect. And again, it's a challenge to get through some of the language changes. What we're going to try to do today is dive through the major changes And some of the videos in here, I understand they don't really come across too well through through your screens. But what I'm going to do is elaborate on them, and most of them have explanations aside from the video. So we'll go through that. There are kind of 8 bullet points we're going to focus on. We've got the spirit of the game and etiquette. One of the things emphasized in the new rules was how to promote a faster pace of play, which I think we all would agree that it's a challenge in today's in the game right now. Is how can we get people to play faster? We have some relaxed requirements. We have penalty requirements. We'll talk about that. About a ball at rest. Did it move? Who moved it? We'll talk about the concept of knowledge or virtual certainty, which has been interjected into that. We'll talk about penalty areas, dropping and redropping, which I just finished my first week out in the field at Boca, and obviously the dropping and redropping, where to drop, relief areas. I'll give some interesting things that are happening there, some things I think you want to be looking out for as you're spreading the word to your members and your customers at your clubs. And that's really my focus today, is to help all of you when you go back to your clubs. There are a lot of things here that are going to be really good for your members, but there's also going to be some things, some responsibilities for you to educate them and help them get through this, because you are the perceived expert, whether you like that role or not. As the head golf professional, director of golf, assistant, whatever, your members are going to come to you because they think you're going to know. So I think what we want to try to do is give you that information, some of it today, and then give you some places to look for more information as you start to educate your members and customers. We have an additional option for a ball and playable in a bunker. And then the last piece deals with advice, equipment, and the stroke and distance local rule, which certainly has been getting a lot of buzz, but we'll talk about that at the very end. So let's move through here. Again, the spirit of the game and etiquette was always in the book, kind of buried to a degree, but now it is in the forefront of the rules, playing in the spirit of the game and acting with integrity. All these things now, these standards of conduct, are now going to be spelled out in the rule book, which is really important. One of the things that's changed is you may remember prior to January 1st, if you were lifting your ball to identify it, or let's say you were lifting it to see if it was unfit for play, the first thing you had to do was announce to your fellow competitor or marker in stroke play your opponent in match play. Well, that has now gone away. There's no requirement for you to announce to anyone that you're doing this. Now, the other requirements are still there. You're still going to have to mark your golf ball. If you're lifting it to identify it, you're still limited to only cleaning to the extent necessary to identify it, and so forth. But the main thing is you don't have to announce to anyone what you're doing. And you might ask, well, why would that be the case? Well, if you think about it, in every other rule, when we are lifting a ball off a cart path to take relief, or if we're in an area of temporary water, formerly casual water, and you're taking relief, you never had to tell anybody what you were doing. Now, many of us did, but you didn't have to. And there was no penalty if you didn't tell anybody. And that's essentially, now we're just taking that, we're assuming the new rules, this new code assumes that people are being honest. So there'll be no requirement to announce what you're doing, but you still will have to mark your ball before you lift it, and that's because you're going to have to put it back. Unless if you were lifting it to see if it was embedded, and it was in fact embedded, and then of course you would drop it in your relief area, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So this player judgment, this has been around forever. Think about at your facility, you might have now a penalty area, but formerly a water hazard, where somebody would hit a tee shot and players would walk up and say, okay, hey, where do you think it last crossed formerly the margin? Now we're going to talk about the edge of the penalty area. And you would just kind of agree. You would use your best judgment, and especially if it was let's say a tee shot that went 200 plus yards, to know exactly where it last crossed the edge if there's no gallery, which most of golf is played that way. So what do? You just use your best judgment as to where it last crossed the edge, and you drop a ball within the rules. And that's going to be okay. Now, we do have a couple interpretations on that. So let's suppose I estimate where it crossed the edge of a penalty area. I drop a ball properly in the right way, and I make a stroke at it. And then somebody finds my ball, and it proves that the reference point that I used was incorrect. Well, there's going to be no problem as long as I used reasonable judgment to figure out where, did the best I could to figure out where it last crossed the edge. The only time this changes a little bit is if you drop the ball, you don't make a stroke at it yet, and then somebody finds your ball, and then it shows that the reference point you used was incorrect. Well, in that case, you now have to lift that ball and fix it and drop it in the right place based on the new reference point. So little nuance there, but this player judgment, it's been around a while, but now it's more formalized in the spirit of game and the etiquette. One of the things that many committees have asked for is a standard of conduct, that committees could set a code of conduct with penalties. You know, before all we had was a serious breach of etiquette, which was kind of the hammer of the committee when people had issues like throwing clubs or acting, not in the spirit of the game. But the only penalty was a DQ. Well, now in the rule book now is this code of conduct that you can put in, and it can have penalties. It could be a progression from a one-stroke penalty to the general penalty to the DQ. And you as a committee can adopt this if you want to, and you would just put your own code together. And perhaps, for let's say junior golf tour or your junior events in your section, you may have something like this in place. Do you have to? No, but it's there for you to use as a tool if need be. So that's a big change there in that part. Pace of play. Here's a video. I'm gonna pop through this because you're not going to be able to hear it. But ready golf. Many people asked over the years, is ready golf okay? And for the most part, it was. But now it's more formalized in the rules of the game. So now in a stroke play setting, obviously we all know that the person further from the hole plays first. But let's suppose that person's not ready. And the other player says, hey, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and play. That's okay. There's no penalty for playing out of turn in the stroke play setting. And you can agree to do that. And it's not a problem. Obviously, what you want to do, though, is you want to do it safely. Let me go back for a second here. You want to do it safely so that no one's endangered. So while it's encouraged, there are some caveats that you want to be careful of. Also, if I'm farther from the hole than John, and I want to play first, and John wants to play before me, I can ask John not to do that, and he should accept my request and not play first. And if, let's say, that happens multiple times, well, then the committee could go into the standard of conduct and perhaps penalize a player if they're not adhering to that request from other players. The good news, though, is as long as people are doing it safely and it's agreed upon by the players, go ahead and do it, and this should help pace play. Now, in a match play setting, a little bit of a different deal there. It was always there was always a decision in the book that allowed somebody in a match play setting to let their opponent play before them if, let's say, they weren't ready. Let's say they wanted to duck into the restroom or duck into the clubhouse to get a beverage, and they said, hey, I know it's my turn to play, but if you're ready, go ahead. And you could do that. And, of course, that's now encouraged in the new code. The only thing you forfeit in a match play competition is your ability to recall the stroke. If you give your opponent permission to play out of turn, you can't then recall their stroke under the order of play. So that's a good thing. This has been around for a bit. This is a big change here, folks. The searching for your ball now, we all know that it used to be 5 minutes. Now it's reduced to 3. And this is when you, your partner, or either of your caddies begin to search. If any one of those people start, that's when the clock starts. And you've got 3 minutes to find your ball, and the ball is lost. If you don't find it within that time, the ball is lost. Also, the standing behind the player. A lot of buzz lately about this particular rule change. Why is it? Well, we all know that prior to the rule change, obviously caddies could be behind the player, and then the only requirement was when the player got ready to make the stroke, they had to get out of the way. Well, now this has been expanded a bit further, as you know, and they cannot stand behind the player when the player begins to take their stance. So that is a major piece to the change. Lots of buzz on this lately, and essentially, again, begin to take the stance. What does that mean? And there's been you might, after all the issues with the last couple of weeks with the ruling with Denny McCarthy, where he was penalized, and they rescinded it, and then the USGA and the RNA got together, and they issued a statement and a clarification on 10.2b, and it's on usga.org if you want to print out a copy of it. I've got several, and I've stuck them in my rule books so that I have it with me. And essentially what it means, the original rule, let's just walk through this. The original rule said the caddy could not be behind the player when they began to take their stance. So that means when that player put either foot, in a position as they were preparing to make the stroke, not a practice swing, but the stroke at the ball. Once they put one foot in place, if the caddy was there, that triggered the penalty, and you could not undo it with the exception of the putting green. And there was a difference there because the putting green, very common for players and caddies to get behind the ball, look out at a line that they want to take for the putt, and collaborate on that, and then go ahead and get in there and make the stroke. So there was an exception carved out that said that, okay, if the caddy did this and the player went in and took their stance, you can get away from the penalty if the caddy got out of the way and the player reset. Well, after probably several rulings out there, that the European Tour had a couple incidents, of course, Denny McCarthy, Web.com. And the good news is I think after rethinking this, now, as we like to say, the exception is the rule, meaning that for any stroke, if the caddy is behind the player when they begin to take their stance and they realize it, they can undo it by merely the caddy stepping away, the player resetting, meaning getting their body out of the way, and then coming back in, and you can avoid the penalty. Now, you can look at this one of two ways. One way is to look at this as this is okay to do, that this could be a routine for players and caddies to take. I choose to look at it otherwise. The rule basically says to caddies, and by the way, this would apply to your partner in a 4-ball setting. The rule is basically saying, don't stand behind your player when they start to take their stance. Pure and simple. And if you want to avoid any issues, that's the way to resolve it. Just have someone not be there when you set your first foot in there to take your stance for the stroke. And that's the easiest way to avoid any issues. Now, in cases where a caddy does this and they realize it, of course, they can get away from the penalty, again, by the player asking the caddy to step away and they reset. And that way, there's no aiming information being given by the caddy that could help the player in aiming at their target, which essentially the reason for this change is that the USGA and the RNA, Rules of Golf Committee, felt that aiming at a target is part of the skill and talent necessary to play the game, fundamental to playing the game. Now, we can spend a lot of time probably debating whether or not that's a good or a bad thing, but that was the reason why they went down this road. We're in a better place now with this new clarification than we were before, but if you have caddies at your club, if you play a lot of 4-ball competitions, you would want to make sure that you get this information out to your members, to your caddies, and remember, caddies they're employed by the player. They want to do a good job, and a lot of times that can lead to being paid very well, tips and so forth, the better job you do. But this is one practice that I think we all want to make sure that is communicated properly to caddies. Just don't stand behind your player when they begin to take the stroke. And if they're not there, there will never be a problem. Now, there are some exceptions to this that have come up that are in this new interpretation, and that is a case where, let's say, a caddy's in the bunker raking the bunker, and it just so happens that they are directly behind on an extension of the line of play of the player. Well, this caddy's raking the bunker, so that would not be a problem. Also, if the caddy were standing there inadvertently, not paying attention, maybe looking up in the sky, whatever it might be, that would be okay as well. But again, I not to be repetitive, but the best way to avoid an issue here is to make sure that those caddies are not behind that player when they begin to take the stroke, and you won't have any problems. But I would certainly encourage you to check out that clarification that was posted on USGA.org last week. This is a really good thing here. This change here now, you prior to January 1, if your caddy was going to mark and lift your golf ball, they needed your permission, and it needed to be each time the act was committed. The new rules now, and this is for the putting green only, the new rules allow your caddy to mark and lift your ball on the putting green at any time, and they don't need the player's permission. And this is putting green only, folks. That's the key part of this. So this, to me, is a very good change. This will help the situation a lot. You won't have to give permission. And keep in mind, one of the things that's always, if you think about who can mark and lift the golf ball, well, the player, the partner, or another person authorized by the player, or now we're going to add to the list the player's caddy when the ball's on the putting green at any time. That's who can mark and lift the golf ball. Who can replace the ball? Well, the player, the partner, or the person who lifted or moved it. So if the caddy marks and lifts the player's ball, who can put the ball back? Well, it could be the player. If there's a partner involved, the partner can do it, but also the caddy could put it back. The key point here is just because the caddy marked and lifted it doesn't mean that he solely has to put it back. Again, player, partner, caddy on the putting green, or another person authorized can mark and lift the ball. Therefore, the reverse is true when replacing it. So the player, the partner, the caddy on the putting green, or the person who lifted a movement can put it back. So this is a key change going forward if you're at a facility that uses caddies or for caddies. And there are a lot of resorts that have this. And this is a good thing. The caddies can get up there, mark the balls, clean them up, put them back down, and that'll certainly help pace the play in many cases. Obviously, another pace of play, the flag stick, that is it's been getting a lot of publicity about, the flag stick. We'll talk about this in a moment. Same thing with this optional local rule for stroke and distance. We'll talk about that at the end. Relaxed requirements and reduced penalties on the putting green and bunkers and accidental acts. Let's go walk through this. On the putting green, I didn't get a chance to see much of the Pebble Beach event, but remember now, the rules now are going to allow the repair of almost any damage on the putting green. The best way to explain this is if you went out to the golf course in the morning, right after it was mowed and prepared by the superintendent and his crew, you've got a putting surface that's prepared for the event. And then what happens is during the course of the round, things happen. People make spike marks. Perhaps they drag their feet, make a heel print. Well, all that kind of damage, you can restore the putting green to what it was when it was mowed. Now, you're not going to be able to get a better deal because of this. So that's the key part of this. You can repair it, which means to restore it. So you can tamp down the spike marks. You could fix a heel print. You could fix, let's say somebody scuffed up the green with the flag stick inadvertently, that you could fix that. If you had some animal damage, you could fix that. If, let's say, a mower ran over an acorn and embedded it in the putting green, which we have seen many times, or a stone, if you could flick that stone or acorn away with ease, which means it's what, a loose impediment, and there's an indentation, you can fix the indentation. That's okay. So all this repair, this would also, in some cases, damage to the hole. Other than normal wear and tear, the hole now could be fixed. You used to be able to have to call the committee, which probably most people will do anyway, still in this world. But if you were able to fix the hole, other than normal wear and tear, you could go ahead and fix it. So all this other damage, go ahead and fix it. Now, the rule does say that it must be fixed promptly. So it isn't like you can spend all day gardening on the putting green, fixing all this damage and creating a tunnel, a pathway to the hole. Again, this is restoring it to what it looked like when it was prepared in the morning. And that's probably the main reason why this was done too, is that you have cases where if you're in a 144 player field, if you tee off first thing in the morning, you've got perfect putting surfaces. If you tee off at 2:30 in the afternoon, well, now you've got all this wear and tear on the putting green that's occurred for all those other players, and now this is a way to level the playing field, so to speak, by allowing this damage to be fixed. So that is a good thing in that respect for repair of damage on the putting green. Again, it means to restore. Doesn't mean you can make it better. You can't make a tunnel for a 3-foot putt, a pathway, if you will. That would be improving, not restoring, and that would be a breach. So keep that in mind when you're talking about repair of the putting green. You can now touch the line of play on the putting green. If you remember, I could touch let's say I was, John was my partner. I could touch the line of play for a stroke from off the putting green, and as long as I touched it and got out of the way before he made a stroke, there was no problem. And there used to be a restriction that when the ball was on the putting green, that I couldn't touch the putting green to indicate a line for putting. That's now gone. You can touch the line of play. Again, we have to be careful here that we're not improving anything. And the main thing here also is this, in indicating this line of play, that I would have to get out of the way during the stroke to avoid a problem. So you can touch the putting green now in this case, and there wouldn't be a problem, just as long as you get out of the way before the stroke. Accidental movement of the ball on the putting green. This might be one of the best changes in my lifetime in terms of the rules of golf, and we've had it in effect for the last 2 years as a local rule, where many ways that you can accidentally cause your ball to move. You could take a practice stroke on the putting green and the ball goes off the toe of your putter. You could drop your coin on the ball or your ball on the coin, and it would move. All this accidental movement, when the ball's on the putting green, the ball would be replaced, and there's no penalty, which is really a good thing with this accidental movement of the ball on the putting green. A little bit of a difference here now when we're talking, and we've seen some cases in Hawaii where we've had both. Excuse me. When you have a case where a player on the putting green has marked and lifted the ball and then replaced it, the main thing to remember is, in this instance, the player owns this spot. So no matter what causes the ball to move now, whether the player caused it accidentally or now we're going to introduce natural forces, if the ball was moved by wind, water, or gravity, once the player has marked, lifted, and replaced the ball, that ball will always get put back on that spot. If the ball was not marked and lifted, in this case, if the ball was moved by wind, water, or gravity, natural forces, the ball would be placed in a new position. So let's go back a couple of years to Billy Horschel at the Masters on hole 15, when he marked his ball, lifted it, and put it back, and a gust of wind blew it into the pond in front of the green. At that point, this rule was not in effect, and he had to take a penalty stroke and dropped the ball under, at that time, the water hazard rule. Now, if he had marked and lifted it and put it back, he would always put it back. Interesting that if another player on 15 in this, under the new code, if they don't mark and lift it and the wind blows their ball into the pond, they will have to treat it like a penalty area and take the penalty stroke to get back in play. So we're still going to have a little bit of an inconsistency potentially with this rules change, but in cases where a player has marked, lifted it, and put it back, if anything moves that ball, you're always going to put it back because you're going to own that spot. And that's a key point with this particular rule change. And again, here we have the flag stick. And again, if you think of prior to 2019, what could you do with the flag stick when your ball was off of the putting green? Well, you could have it attended, you could have it removed, you can leave it in. Either way, any one of those options, you could have it lifted or held up to indicate the position. No problem. And all those things are now allowable for any stroke, even from the putting green. So if you're on the putting green, you can leave it in, you can have it attended, you can have it removed. And if the ball strikes the flag stick when you leave it in, we all know, we've seen it now for a few weeks. And look, I have to admit, it does look a little bit strange. But you can go back to the 60s. On Christmas Day, or Shell's Wonderful World of Golf, you had Gene Littler and Byron Nelson playing at Pine Valley in one of those events. And there's a great putt by Gene Littler that played from the putting green, hits the flag stick, and at that time it was allowable. There was no penalty. So that's what the rule is now. I know we're seeing statistics out there that say that it improves your ability to make putts by up to 30%. You know what? So for the elite player, maybe it's really helping them because they generally hit a lot of putts that may hit the flag stick. But you know what? If this helps the other 99% of the people that play the game, is this a good or a bad thing? I tend to think it's a good thing, but the jury's out on this. We'll see. There's a lot of people concerned about the optics of it. But again, we don't write the rules. We this is a big change, and it's just something that you can have some fun with your members and your customers, knowing that they can leave the flag stick in, and if it can help them perhaps improve their score a little bit, you know what? I'm all for it. Help them have a little bit more fun playing the game. So that's a big change. Let's talk about bunkers for a moment. We'll separate bunkers from penalty areas. Bunkers, big changes here. Remember, we used to have the term hazard was a definition, and under that heading it said bunkers are water hazards. Well, now they're broken apart. Bunkers is its own definition. It's still the same. It's these prepared areas of sand. Now you can move loose impediments in bunkers, these natural objects that might end up in there. Keep in mind that you don't have carte blanche when you're doing this, because in many cases you're moving sand. So the big thing here is that a little bit of incidental movement of sand when you're moving a loose impediment is okay, but you couldn't go in there, use a club, and rake away a bunch of sand along with the loose impediment. So I would be conscious of that and coach your members and customers to just flick away a stone or a twig or a leaf without, minimal disturbance of sand would be the best way to put it. And I mentioned stones. Keep in mind that, for the last several years, many clubs or associations have used the local rule for stones in bunkers to be movable obstructions. Well, that local rule is gone, folks. So it's important to note that what's the status of a stone in a bunker is now a loose impediment. And that's important because if you move a loose impediment and the ball moves, it's going to be a penalty stroke. Whereas before, when it was an obstruction, if you moved the obstruction and the ball moved, there was no penalty. So now a stone is now a loose impediment, and it's just important to note the difference when its status is a loose impediment versus an obstruction in the change when your ball's in a bunker. Again, you can move these loose impediments. You can touch the sand generally, except near the ball. You can ground your club except near the ball. And what do we mean by that? We're talking about if I'm standing in a bunker and I'm leaning on my club, touching the sand, that's not going to be a problem. If I want to rake an area away from my ball where somebody made footprints and didn't rake them, and I'm using proper etiquette and care for the course, I go ahead and I smooth out the sand. That's no problem. That was okay last year as well, as long as you're not improving what we call those protected areas. And in the new code, think of the word CATS, conditions affecting the stroke. And that would be lie of ball, area of intended stance or swing, line of play, or an area in which you're going to drop a golf ball. So as long as you don't improve CATS, you can go ahead and touch sand and ground your club. Now we're also talking about this area immediately in front of and behind the ball. You are not allowed to touch that area. When you're making a stroke, you cannot put your club down and touch the sand behind the ball or immediately in front of the ball. So just imagine a little circle, almost like when you teach people how to hit a bunker shot, you kind of imagine a little square around the ball or a dish, and you try to just splash the sand out of the dish. Well, that area now is kind of off limits, if you will, when you're getting ready to hit a bunker shot of touching the sand. Also, when you take the club back, you're not. It's still a restriction to not touch the sand on your backswing for the stroke. That would be a penalty. And then the last piece to this is testing is still a problem. So you're not allowed to go into a bunker and take a bunch of practice swings or do anything that would be construed as testing. That would still be a breach. So again, move loose impediments, lean on your club, rake for the care of the course, don't improve the conditions affecting the stroke. And then the restricted areas would be, again, the area immediately in front of and behind the ball. The area when you're taking your backswing for the stroke, not hitting the sand, and also no testing. That is still a restriction under the rules here in 2019. So big changes in bunkers going forward. Let's talk about some reduced penalties. If you make a stroke and the ball accidentally hits you or your equipment, but essentially any accidental deflections are now no penalty. So if I hit a stroke at a ball, hits a tree and comes back and hits me, hits my golf cart, hits my equipment, no penalty. Play the ball as it lies. Unless it came to rest in or on the person or the equipment, well, then we're going to drop away from that. We have a rule that covers that. But no penalty in this case. Again, we talked about this movement of the ball on the putting green. No penalty for accidental movement. That's a really good change. This one here might be, again, I think one of the best changes going forward here, and that is if you move your ball during search, now there's going to be no penalty, and you're just going to replace it. And in the replacing aspect of this, even if you don't know the spot, you're going to estimate and place it there. So again, this makes all the sense in the world to me. At the Ryder Cup last September in France, I had a 4-ball match on Friday morning, and we must have had 8 ball searches. And you remember that golf course, narrow fairways, high rough. And in each case, it was interesting because whichever ball we were looking for, their opponent said, hey, look, you stand over there. We'll look for your ball because we don't want to see you get a penalty stroke for causing it to move. And if you think about that, it didn't make any sense that everybody else could look for my ball, and if it moved, there was no penalty. But if me, my partner, or either of our caddies caused it to move, I got a 1-stroke penalty. Well, now all that's gone away. As long as it's during the search process and the ball moves, no penalty, put it back. So, I'm from the Northeast in Philadelphia. We get a lot of leaves in the fall. Very common to go looking through some leaves. And now if I'm sweeping them away with my foot or my club and I cause the ball to move, well, I'm just going to put the ball back, no penalty, and play on. So this is a really good change, I think, to communicate to your members and your customers. Double hits, the old TC Chen rule. Again, if you hit the ball more than once, all you're going to do now is just count a stroke at the ball. And keep in mind, there's been a lot of great videos out there, people getting creative about getting out from behind trees. Again, this rule talks about accidental. So if I accidentally hit my ball more than once, count the stroke, no penalty strokes, and I play it as it lies. If I deflect it deliberately, well, we have a rule that covers that, and that will be a penalty under Rule 11 for deliberately deflecting my ball. So all these videos, while they're nice, they're doing it deliberately, and that would be a breach, and that's important to note. Accidental, again, no penalty, just count the stroke of the ball and play it as it lies. That's a nice change. Virtual certainty about what caused your ball to move. Essentially, what we want to try to do here is when your ball, there are 4 things that can cause the ball to move. A player, it could be an outside influence could cause the ball to move. And again, you want to look under Rule 9 now about ball at rest moved, and look at those things that can cause a ball to move, and figure out what it is, what caused the ball to move. And we're introducing this concept of knowledge or virtual certainty to conclude what caused your ball to move. Let's talk about the player for a moment, because that's really what we deal with most of the time. Again, first of all, we have to determine, did the ball move? And if we know that it moved, then what caused it to move? Did the player cause it to move in this case? Did another person cause it to move? Was it natural forces? And then you want to dive in and figure out, and again, the rules will point you in the right direction. So in the case of a player, what did they do near the ball? And this knowledge of virtual certainty means, again, knowledge means you know. So if you know the player caused the ball to move, that's easy. Virtual certainty is not 100% certain. It's probably 95% certain that this player who took a bunch of practice swings near the ball, and on one of them, immediately after the club hit the ground near the ball moved. There wasn't a long period of time. Well, then I think we can get to some virtual certainty that the player caused it to move. But now we're interjecting this knowledge of virtual certainty into a ball moving, which I think is important to note. Penalty areas. Let's talk about penalty areas, and essentially, for many years, obviously, if you knew what red and yellow water hazards were, well, they are now the same in 2019, only we're now calling them penalty areas. In addition to that, what we're introducing to this area would be parts of the golf course where you have desert areas, high grass areas, dense trees, where most likely a ball could be lost. Now committees would be able to mark them as penalty areas if they want to. And I would just encourage all of you to look at your facility and go out there and look and see, okay, are there any areas, I would call them non-traditional bodies of water that you might want to consider marking as a penalty area. Do you have to do it? No. It's just one of those things that you want to take into account when you're looking at your facility. And again, these are cases where if a ball got in there, it would be almost certain that the player is going to have to go back under stroke and distance. And this would be a case where maybe you want to put a red line around it and treat it as a penalty area. Maybe you have areas where you have a lot of dangerous animals like rattlesnakes, scorpions, in the desert areas of California. You can put red lines around and make these penalty areas if you want to, and then the player could just operate under Rule 17 and treat it as a penalty area without any trouble. So that's important to note. Let's walk through here a little bit. Here's, again, going back to, we talked about bunkers, and now essentially bunkers are more restrictive than penalty areas, because if you're going to see here, just like bunkers, you can move loose impediments. That's no problem. But now, think about this now. You can ground your club. You can take practice swings. You can touch the water. All these things are okay in a penalty area, red or yellow. Now, the one thing to be careful of here is you still have to remember remember that acronym I use, CATS, conditions affecting the stroke, you still are prohibited from improving your conditions affecting the stroke if you go through these practice swings grounding your club or touching the water. So I would be careful here. Also, if you cause your ball to move, you're going to have a problem. But again, a whole new world now when the ball's in a penalty area. And you might ask, well, why is this change? Why was this change made? Well, if we're going to mark some of these non-traditional areas as penalty areas, it's quite common to have twigs, leaves, etc., loose impediments in those areas. So we're going to say, go ahead and move them out of the way. And then also in those areas where normally, if they weren't marked as a penalty area, you'd be grounding your club in there. We didn't want to trap players. So now go ahead and ground your club in these penalty areas going forward. So that's a big change that you want to communicate to your members and your customers. All right, so let's talk about options. Again, if you knew what your options were before, for yellow, they are exactly the same. Stroke and distance, going back to where you played the previous stroke, and that's red or yellow. And then we're going to talk about back on the line relief, which before we used to say go back on the flag line, and you used to drop it on the line. Well, now what you're doing is, we'll talk about this in a moment, you're going to be dropping into a 1 club length relief area. But again, for yellow, stroke and distance, and back on the line, and this is for both red and yellow, but again, if you knew what yellow was before, you're okay. If it's red, you have stroke and distance, you have back on the line, and then you also have what we're going to call lateral relief, which is 2 club lengths from where it last crossed the edge of this red penalty area, same as before. So one way to remember this, as I like to think of it, is as ABC. Option A is all the way back, stroke and distance. B, back on the line. And then C would be club length. So that would be for red only, you get the club length option. So think of ABC, and you'll see under ball and playable, same thing. If you can, if that helps you remember your options, then just think about ABC. And in the case of penalty areas, the C part is only for red. One big thing this year with the new rules is the opposite margin option, equidistant from the hole, that was in the book for many, many years, is not in the rules of golf unless you enact it by local rule. So what you would want to do is go out to your facility, look at your penalty areas, red penalty areas, and see, are there any that you'd really be disadvantaging a player by not having the opposite margin available to them. And a good example would be if you think of 13 at Augusta, dogleg left par 5, we all know it well. A lot of players will try to cut that corner, and balls will hit those trees and go into the red penalty area on the left side. And if you didn't let a player drop on the opposite margin, they could be dropping in azaleas and in these brush areas, which I think everybody would agree, the player's taking a penalty stroke. So I can pretty much assure you that this opposite margin is going to be available at the Masters on hole 13. A great resource to look for the criteria in your official guide that everybody should have. I think it's $20 to buy them. Every club should have a couple of these to be in your shop, in your office, in your locker rooms maybe, and it has a whole section in the back on what criteria would a committee use in putting in an opposite margin. And you can read through that, look at your facility, and it's up to you as a club to decide where you want to put in the opposite margin. Again, it has to be enacted by local rule, though. So if you don't say anything and a player hits the ball into a red penalty area, well, the only option they're only going to have the option from where it last crossed the edge. No opposite margin unless a local rule is in effect. All right, let's talk about dropping the right way. Of course, this has been getting a lot of buzz. And again, what we're talking about is the player only. One little difference here is in a partner's event, your partner can drop the ball. That's okay now. Knee height, and there's some great pictures in the book of if you're down on your knees, your height is your knee height. So whatever that's measured to. And I think the best way to explain this is if you think of pre-2019, you had shoulder height, and we always said you had a little bit high or a little bit low was okay. Well, all we're doing now is moving this slot, if you will, right down to your knee height. So think of the length of your kneecap, a little bit below that, a little bit above it. You have that little window in which when you bend forward to drop the ball, you just got to be in the slot knee height. Again, the ball has to go straight down, no influencing by throwing it, spinning it, rolling it, and the ball has to hit the relief area. It's got to strike the ground in the relief area, and in every case, now under the rules of golf, when you are dropping the ball, you are dropping into either a 1 or 2 club length relief area. So, and we have to drop it the right way, which meets all of this criteria. The ball has to strike the ground in the relief area, and of course, the ball has to stay in the relief area. And that's important to note as you get into the. And this is a fundamental piece to the new rule, and I think getting the word out to your members and how to drop it. One way to think about it is people say, well, how do I drop it at knee height? Well, think about it. When you pick the ball out of the hole, what do? You kind of bend forward, and if you just use the same technique you use to pick the ball out of the hole to drop the ball at knee height, that may help someone in understanding how they drop it. So here we go. Club lengths. When we talk about measuring your relief areas, and in terms of whether or not a ball has to be redropped, it's now going to be a fixed distance. It's always going to be the longest club in your bag except your putter. So for most of us, that means our driver. Some people might play with a 3-wood as their longest club, but whatever longest club in your bag except your putter, and you will use that club for all of your measuring of either your 1 or 2 club length relief areas. Fixed distance, very important to know. Okay, we're measuring, again, we're using that 1 club length from an estimated point. In this case here, you see that picture, we've got obstruction. So now this player is finding the nearest point of complete relief, a little bit of a different term. Used to be nearest point of relief, now it's nearest point of complete relief. And now once we mark that spot, we're now going to measure, in this case, 1 club length. So if you knew how to take relief from an obstruction before, or temporary water, formerly casual water, or ground under repair, you'll know what to do in 2019, because again, you're finding your nearest point of complete relief. You're measuring your 1 club length with the longest club in your bag except your putter, and that is now going to identify your 1 club length in radius piece of pie that's going to be your relief area. And then you're going to have to do what? You're going to have to drop it the right way in your relief area. It's got to strike the ground in the relief area, and it has to stay in the relief area. So that's important to note when we're talking about reference points. In the case of a penalty area where it last crossed the edge, you're going to use that as your spot for measuring 2 club lengths for, let's say, a red penalty area. Spot where a previous stroke was made. Let me just talk a little bit about this, because in our event at Boca a couple weeks ago, this is a bit of a trap, folks. So you want to be careful. So if you are using back on the line relief, what are you using? You're using where the ball last crossed the edge of the penalty area, and you're going to go back as far as you want. And the biggest thing I want to urge all of you to talk to your members and customers is have them mark the reference point. And then from that reference point, they're going to have a 1 club length relief area to drop the ball for a yellow, going back on the line relief for a penalty area. If you're going back to where you made the previous stroke, so stroke and distance, let's say, you're going back to where you hit your ball out of bounds, put a reference point in the ground, and you've got a 1 club length relief area, because if the ball rolls closer to the hole than this reference point, the ball must be redropped. Think about it in the old days when we went back on the line, flag line, under a water hazard situation. If we dropped the ball and it rolled a little bit forward, as long as it didn't roll more than 2 club lengths or near the hole and where it last crossed the margin of this water hazard, that ball was in play. Well, forget all that right now. When we're going back on the line relief, we are choosing a reference point, and we should mark it with a T or a coin or whatever, and then we've got our 1 club length relief area. The twist here is if someone does not mark the reference point and they just go back on the line relief and they drop a ball without choosing a reference point, well, the rules of golf now are going to say what that reference point is, and that is where that ball strikes the ground. We're going to come across to the line, going back on the line, and that is going to be your reference point. So in essence, and this might be confusing, I would actually encourage you to look at some of the language in the book and some of the diagrams. If I don't choose a reference point and I drop the ball and it rolls forward any amount, I have to redrop it, because the rule's then going to choose the reference point for me. And that is why I can't encourage you enough for you when you play, and also to your customers, is put a T in the ground and mark this reference point. That is really important, and that will dictate whether or not a ball has to be redropped. And it also, again, we're using longest club in the bag to do our measuring. In the case of an embedded ball, and this is important, we used to drop the ball, we used to say just try to drop it back in the pitch mark. Well, now the reference point is the spot immediately behind the pitch mark. And then you have a 1 club length relief area. Again, always dropping within in either a 1 or 2 club length relief area. And the only the 2 club length relief areas are for red penalty areas and for the third option under ball and playable, which is dropping the ball within 2 club lengths of where the ball lay. Those are your only 2 club length relief options. All the other ones are 1 club length. So important, ball embedded. Again, you're not dropping as near as possible. You are dropping in a 1 club length relief area under the embedded ball rule. And again, all within 1 club length of a reference point, not near the hole. There you see some good diagrams there. The key piece to this is the back on the line relief instead of a trap. So make sure your members are putting a T in the ground to mark the reference point. Lateral relief is 2 club lengths. We talked about that. Again, this is the same as before. Measure your 2 club lengths and drop within. It's got to strike the course within that 2 club length area, and it's got to stay in that 2 club length area. When to redrop? Again, folks, basically we're doing the same thing we did before. We've got a relief area, and if we drop the ball in the right way in our relief area and it rolls out of it, we're going to redrop it. And if it happens again, we're going to then place it where it struck the ground, first struck the ground in our relief area. We're going to place it there. If the ball fails to stay at rest, we're going to try to place it 1 more time. If it won't stay at rest, we're going to then go to the nearest spot known near the hole where it will stay at rest. So you could look at this as drop, redrop, place again, and then hunt for a spot where it will stay at rest, known near the hole. And the last part of that, there could be a case where the only place you can get this ball to stay at rest might be outside your relief area. So that's the only time you're really getting outside of your relief area when you're taking relief. In some cases, penalty, some cases without. So when to redrop. Sorry, these videos. The right way drop is important. Again, we're dropping from knee height. The ball is dropping straight down. No influencing by spinning or otherwise. So we want to drop it the right way, and it's got to strike the ground within our relief area. A wrong way drop would be too high, would be too low, would be spinning. That would be a wrong way drop. Now, this is interesting. If the ball hits you, the player, or your equipment before hitting the ground, that's going to be a wrong way drop. and there's no limit to the number of times you're going to do this till you get it right. Interestingly enough, if the ball hits the ground first and then hits you or your equipment, this is going to be a good drop. The ball is going to be in play. So this is a key distinction from pre-2019. So again, if you drop it, if it strikes you or your equipment on the way down before the ground, you must redrop it. It's a wrong way drop. If it strikes the ground first, the right way, and then hits you or your equipment, that ball's in play, provided it stayed in your relief area. Keep in mind now, folks, the tees that you would use to mark the extent of an area to drop the ball, tees are now going to be treated as your equipment. Prior to 2018, if a ball, these small objects used to mark these areas were not considered equipment. Now they are. So if you drop the ball and it struck the tee first before the ground, you must redrop it. That's a key point when we're talking about marking the area in which you're going to drop the ball. Anytime you're dropping a ball, whether it's for free relief or penalty relief, you can substitute a ball. So you can either drop the ball or another ball under any rule where you are allowed to drop. So from a cart path, temporary water, ground under repair, penalty areas, ball and playable, go ahead and substitute. No problem under any of these rules, whether it be free relief or penalty relief. This new option for a ball unplayable in a bunker, this may be a case where we all know that at ball unplayable you have three options, right? You have stroke and distance. Again, remember our ABC. Stroke and distance. B is back on the line relief, and C is 2 club lengths. And we know that if our ball's in a bunker, that the last 2 options, the ball has to be dropped in the bunker for 1 penalty stroke. Okay, and we can declare a ball anywhere on the course except in a penalty area. This new option now allows a player to then take the ball. Oops, I thought there was a picture there. But essentially now what you can do is go back on the line outside the bunker and take an additional penalty stroke, 2 strokes in all, and drop it under the back on the line relief option. So imagine you are playing the road hole at St. Andrews and you hit it into that bunker and you're up against the lip. Well, this might be a case where a player might choose to take the 2 penalty strokes and drop outside it. If you have newer players and you have deep bunkers at your golf course, this might be a really good option for them. Take that extra penalty stroke and then come outside the bunker. So that's an important one to make note of. We talked about not standing behind the player, the caddy being able to mark and lift the ball on the putting green. Let's talk about, I know we're going over here, let's talk about clubs for a moment. Damage to clubs. If you damage your club for any reason, this would include anger now, you're going to have 3 options. You're going to be able to continue to play with it for the remainder of the round. Even if it now, if because of your damaging it, it now doesn't conform, you can still use it for the remainder of the round, and you can repair it. Again, but you're limited to the same grip, the same shaft, the same head. And that's where it ends, folks. Now, there is an exception where if your club is damaged and it's unfit, let's say it breaks because of something outside your influence, there would be an exceptional case where you could replace it, but otherwise, you're stuck. So you might say, well, why? Let's talk about an example where a face cracks when a player hits a tee shot. Well, unfortunately, that player can either use that club for the remainder of the round. Obviously, repairing it is not going to be an option because they can't replace the head because they are restricted to the same grip, same shaft, same head. We'll see how this plays out. I think this is going to be interesting going forward. What I've told people is, some of the players on our tour is you always have the option to start with 13 because you can always add one when you have 13 clubs in the bag. So if you think you have a high club head speed, you think there's at times you get cracked faces on your equipment, well, you might start with 13, but you will no longer be able to replace a club because it's unfit, unless it's that exception where some outside influence damaged your club, and then you can go ahead and replace it in that case. So very important change when we're talking about clubs. DMDs, we all know now, now that's the rule. You can prohibit them by local rule, but now that's the rule of golf. That's a good thing. The stroke and distance, I'm only going to talk just to encourage you to go look at the video on usga.org and see if it's something you might be able to use at your facility. One could argue it's a little bit convoluted, but it is an alternative. And for places where you're trying to encourage pace of play, I know a lot of clubs that are using it. I know many that aren't. There's no right or wrong answer here. The key point is it has to be by local rule. There was some misunderstanding that now this is the new rule for stroke and distance, and it's not the case. If you lose your ball or hit it out of bounds under the rules of golf, your only option is to go back under stroke and distance. If you enact this local rule, you're going to have an additional option that you could exercise. And I just encourage you to go to usga.org to check that out. Again, I know we went over here a little bit. Resources, usga.org. Again, get that official guide for your golf shop. There's a lot. All the model local rules are in the back. They did a wonderful job with that book. There's a lot of great information in there, and I think every operation should have multiple copies of that laying around for your staff to utilize. Lots of videos on usga.org. We just posted, we did 12 videos on PGA.org that I did down at PGA Golf Club, and they're on PGA.org for you to check them out. They may help you talk about a lot of these different changes. So again, you've got your player's guide, which your members can get if they join as a USGA member. They get that book, and then also you've got the rule book, which is what most of us will be using. Again, because about 400 decisions have been rolled into that book, which is really good. And again, utilize these resources to educate your members. I would also say that PGA of America Rules Committee members are all over the country, in all parts. You got Dave Potus down there at Bel Air. You got Teddy Antonopoulos up at Mayakama, up in Napa, up in that area. And again, if you want one of us to come to your section to do a program, you know, that's an option for you. And of course, you got golf associations have a lot of good people as well. So the key part of this is educating the people of these changes going forward. Some of them are pretty significant. And again, you're going to be perceived to be the expert. So why not get out in front of this stuff and be the expert? And that will certainly help you from a credibility standpoint with your members and customers. So with that, that's all I got.
Tom, thank you very much. I mean, I know this. You've done similar presentations to this Catalyst, and upwards of 3 and 4 hours long. So I do thank you for condensing it down into the confines of our hour that we have on the Catalyst. I have several questions that have come in during the course of the presentation, but you did answer all of them along the way regarding local rules and new protocol and taking a drop. And I don't have any further questions at this time. We did run over a little bit, but not too badly. Want to thank everybody for being on the Catalyst webinar series this morning. As usual, the YouTube recording of Tom's presentation will be going out here shortly, along with a 10-question quiz on this morning's Catalyst. Please take the quiz and return it to Sharon Kerfman at skerfman@pgahq.com. A score of 70% or better will earn 1 MSR credit for attending this morning's Catalyst. Want to encourage everybody to be on the Catalyst in 2 weeks with John McNair, former SCPGA president and COO of JC Sports, talking about traits of successful management in today's competitive golf market. Thank you, everybody. Mr. Carpus, thank you very much for being on this morning. Thank you very, very much.
My pleasure, everybody. Have a great season.
Thank you, sir. Take care. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Okay.